His team and he offer their clients alternative financing solutions. Erick has the largest team in Quebec at Multi-Prêts. In the alternative lending sector, his team and he have closed tens of millions in transaction volume since the start of his career. The goal of each of these transactions is to help people who don't qualify with traditional banks get the financing they need to achieve their goals. So without further ado, I present Erick Brunet.
Private mortgage loans are not regulated. Hi everyone, let me introduce myself. My name's Erick Brunet. I've been a mortgage broker at Multi-Prêts since the early 2000s, specializing in alternative mortgage financing solutions. And today, I'm here to talk to you about fraud involving private mortgage lenders. Both the mortgage lender who commits fraud and the client who uses the mortgage lender to commit fraud. And over the course of my career, I've seen quite a few, actually a huge number. So before getting into the heart of the matter, I'm going to introduce myself a bit, tell you about who I am, so you can understand where I come from and why I chose to do what I do in life. So the first thing I want to share with you is that I have a visual impairment. I am partially blind, and there are no glasses, no surgery, no contact lenses that can correct my visual impairment. My visual impairment is called congenital nystagmus. I was born with it. And believe me, my friends, I've done the research online. I've called every specialist, optometrist, and surgeon. There's no one who can help me with my eyes. And today, there are two reasons why I'm sharing my visual impairment with you. Two reasons why I want to share this with you. The first reason is that if you see me at a networking event or a corporate event and I walk right past you without saying hi, it's not because I'm a snob, it's because I didn't recognize you. So come up to me, come say hi. I'm always happy to talk with you and shake your hand. And the second reason I'm telling you about my visual impairment is that just like my clients who face challenges, everyone in life has had tough times, difficulties. You know, my visual impairment, I was really self-conscious about it when I was younger. And it caused me a lot of hang-ups. And everyone has their own handicap. I'd like everyone in the room who has had or who has difficulties, who has faced challenges, who has had blocks, handicaps, or limitations to raise their hand. I'd like you to raise your hand. It's not our limitations, it's not my handicap that defines the person I am today. It's what I'm going to do with it. It's about where I decide to go from here. Today, I've made different decisions. I've asked myself different questions. And in my life, I feel an enormous amount of gratitude for where I am today. A huge amount of gratitude for the people around me, my coworkers, my team, my family, and also just being here in front of you today. I would like to take the time to thank the organizing members of the Fraud Symposium for inviting me here today. Thank you so much. Now, my career choice. Okay, because of my visual impairment, I really had to find a particular niche for myself. Because in the early 2000s, mortgage brokers would travel to meet clients at their homes. When I started, because of my visual impairment, I can't drive. I can't get a driver's license. I had to find a niche where people would have to come to see me. That's pretty much why I specialized in alternative mortgage lending. And then in the early 2000s, there were about 15 or so. There was Exceed, Wells Fargo, HSBC Finance, Cité Financière. There were about 15 a month. And then I really specialized in alternative lending, in what we called B-lending in our jargon. And then in 2008, when the commercial paper crisis hit, overnight, they all shut down. I thought that was the end of my career. And so we had to get creative. That's when private mortgage lenders entered the market, because lenders like Exceed, Wells Fargo, GMAC were no longer renewing their mortgages. So then, people found themselves stuck with their loan contracts. They were taking 1-year, 2-year, 3-year terms. Then at the end of the term, the mortgage lender would call in the loan. So we needed financing solutions. That's when private lenders came in large numbers. And now, today, banking regulations, the underwriting rules are so extremely strict that in many cases, it really opens the door to fraud. You have to be careful, especially with banks, yes, but even more so with private lenders and mortgage brokers, about document falsification, about all the types of fraud that can be committed. Especially with private mortgage lenders, because of the way they review files. What private mortgage lenders do is look at the equity in the property. The question they're going to ask themselves is, if it's a house worth $500,000 and we need to lend $200,000 on it, is my capital at risk? No, it's a good guarantee, but they're not really going to look at the rest of the file, like repayment capacity, credit history, or property index. Those are things that are very important. Often, private lenders can fall victim to fraud more easily than banks at that level. So I have a team at Multi-Prêts. There are 4 of us working full-time handling applications. Sometimes we get 10, 15, even 20 applications a day coming in. Unfortunately, not all of them go through, or fortunately, not all of them go through. But our job is to screen all those applications and see which transactions are actually worth doing. To accept a transaction in our team, we have 3 criteria. First, it has to be good for the client. This transaction needs to provide a practical solution for the client. There must be a clear exit plan. The transaction should ultimately cost the client less. It must cost the client less to complete the transaction than it would if they chose not to proceed with it. It also has to be good for the lender. You have to understand that private mortgage lending is people like you and me lending their own money. My father was a private lender for about 10 years. And there were cases where it happened. He had to start legal proceedings against the client. When I saw my father struggling to sleep at night, stressed out by transactions that weren't going well. These have to be transactions that are good for lenders, for investors. And then the third rule for us to accept a file at the office is that it has to be good for the image of our industry. I've been a mortgage broker for about 15 years now. My father was one of the founders of Multi-Prêts. My father started in the early 2000s. He was one of the first mortgage brokers in Quebec. Of course, today, when we do a transaction, first of all, I want to make sure to maintain a good image, personally. Secondly, I want the company I work for, Multi-Prêts, to also maintain a good image. And I also want to make sure to preserve the good reputation of what my father built throughout his life. So there are 3 types of alternative financing available on the market today. There are B loans, as we call them in our field. So B loans include Equitable Bank, Home Trust, and B2B Bank. There are fewer of them now than there were in the early 2000s, but there are still a few around, and they make up a good part of the market. Next, something that's becoming more and more popular on the market, buyback investors. I was invited. About 8 months ago, there was a roundtable at CMHC. There were about 10 of us, all experts in the field. There were mortgage brokers, private lenders, B lenders, and buyback investors. And we talked a lot about the buyback program at the CMHC roundtable. It's something that's becoming more and more popular on the market. Some people also know it as rent-to-own. So the investor will actually put the property in their own name and rent it to the client for a period of 3 to 5 years. Why 3 to 5 years? Because, as I said, the rules for mortgage underwriting at the banks are getting stricter and stricter. Now, when it comes to private mortgage lenders, I had updated my presentation, but this isn't the right one. So interest rates on first mortgages, first of all, private mortgage lenders will go up to a maximum of 75% of the value. What you need to understand is that at 75% of the value, that's the first level of risk for a private lender. So 75% of the value is really for the best cases. I would say that most of the time, it's more like 60 to 65% of the value. For a property worth $300,000, private mortgage lenders will often lend up to $180,000, so there's a lot of equity left in the property. Interest rates range from 6 to 15% on a first mortgage. That's a 9% difference in the interest rate. I don't know if you realize, but 9% of $200,000 is $18,000 in interest. That's 9% of $200,000, which means the client would pay $18,000 more per year in interest. So those are big differences in interest rates. Then there are the application fees, which range from 1 to 3%, and brokerage fees, also from 1 to 3%. Also, what else did I mention? There are exit fees, opening fees, and a deposit required when opening the file. So what you need to understand here is that for a private lender explaining the transaction to a client, it's easy to play with the numbers. Let me give you an example. For example, let's say we make a loan of $100,000, and I tell you the interest rate is $1,000. $1,000 is 1%. So that would mean $1,000 in interest paid after 1 year. But if I tell you there are $9,000 in processing fees, after 1 year, that's a total of $10,000 that has been paid. That's not a 1% interest rate. That's a 10% interest rate. You understand? There are no opening fees, but there are closing fees. At the closing of the loan, a 3% fee is charged. Often, with private lenders, clients don't know what questions to ask. The only question they know is, what's the interest rate? The interest rate is 1%. Oh, great, okay. So they go ahead with that transaction. But there's a $9,000 application fee. It's not a 1% interest rate, it's a 10% interest rate. Private lenders, often with bad intentions, will play around with those numbers. And the client, when they get to the notary, even then, the notary often goes through the loan contract so quickly that the client doesn't really understand what's going on. So today, I'm going to be giving you 3 different cases of fraud that have actually happened quite recently, and I think you'll find these examples very interesting and informative. And then, in the past few months, in the past few years that I've had, I picked the ones that I found to be the most sneaky. People didn't see these coming at all. So first case, we have a property in Laval worth $650,000, and there's no mortgage on it. The client needs $300,000, and then it's for his in-laws who are outside the country. Then there's a power of attorney in the file. Right there, a power of attorney in the file. We can't talk to the in-laws because they're out of the country. We can only deal with the sign law. It's a case of fraud. It's identity theft. It wasn't the son-in-law. The people in question had left the country, and then they tried to steal the property. But since our office specializes in private lending and we deal with this every day, we saw it coming right away. So we notified the authorities, and in the end, he wasn't able to complete his transaction. I even made it my duty to put an alert on the property in the land registry to make sure nothing was happening with the property's titles. In this case, it wasn't the private mortgage lender who tried to commit fraud, but rather they tried to use the private mortgage lender to commit fraud. Because for any private lender, a property worth $650,000 in Laval, and you only need to lend $300,000, everyone wants to do that. All the private lenders would be fighting over that deal. Often, there are little clues that it's an identity theft, or like I said, the power of attorney. He needs all of that by tomorrow morning. He wants it done fast, fast, fast. Then, he doesn't care about the interest rate, any rate at all. The fees, he doesn't care about them. He needs all of this quickly. These are cases, these are signs that a fraud is happening. A second case we had, I'll always remember it, even though it was a few years ago. But the lady had been so misled. Because like I said, the only question clients have is, what's the interest rate? Oh, what's the interest rate? So we have a property in the West Island of Montreal that's worth $500,000. There's a first-rank mortgage loan of $150,000. There's a second mortgage of $20,000 registered on the property. And then the client needs an additional $20,000 to pay off some debts. So my offer, the offer she received from a private lender elsewhere, was an interest rate of 10% with a $500 application fee. This was the complete offer she was presented with. That sounds normal. You know, it's not like the lender showed up and said, oh, I'll do this for you at 1%, no application fee. That would have seemed sketchy. Okay? But people, mortgage brokers who aren't specialized in this, or even clients, look at this transaction and it seems fair. My offer was an interest rate of 15% with $3,000 in application fees. That's really different, you know? She says, Eric, I like you, but your offer is really a lot more expensive than the other private mortgage lenders. So she decides to go with that offer. I said, ma'am, be careful. I suspect something fishy is going on. The offer is too good to be true. I know the competition. I've been doing this for about 15 years now. I know what's being offered on the market by a private mortgage lender. And this doesn't make any sense. She took the offer. And what the lender said was that they would do a 6-month term. And then after 6 months anyway, ma'am, you don't want to stay with me for more than 6 months. You want to go back to the banks afterwards. Ma'am, yes. But ma'am, she asks a pretty smart question. She says, but what if after 6 months I don't qualify with the banks? Ma'am, no problem. We'll renew for you. Okay. After 6 months, the lender, I say to the client, listen, ma'am, I'm really sorry, but I'm gonna need to get my money back, my $20,000, because my daughter is gonna study in the United States and I need all my cash. So don't worry, someone is gonna come to your place, okay? And they're gonna bring you a paper. It's called a 60-day notice, but don't worry, it's normal. It's the standard procedure when I call back my loan. So the client, okay, fine. She gets the bailiff, just as she was supposed to. She takes the 60-day notice and she carefully puts it on the counter. A default judgment was issued. And then when the time came for the eviction, that's when she realized what was happening, and she called me back in a panic. So fortunately, in this case, we were quick enough to refinance and pay back the private operator lender, and the lady was able to keep her house. You know, sometimes an offer that's too good to be true, it wasn't a ridiculous offer for someone who's not in that field. Third case. I'm going to share another moment from my life. Me in 2008, when the commercial paper crisis hit and everything collapsed, I lost all my lenders. I was a little desperate. I decided to take a sabbatical year. So I went traveling in Asia during my sabbatical year. I visited about 15 countries in Asia. It was the experience of my life, for real. It was incredible. And I really fell in love with Vietnam. And then, when I finished my sabbatical year, I came back. Then I told my dad, I said, listen, I'd really like to go back to Vietnam. And my dad told me, in 2008, I heard about a technology called IP phones. Virtual faxes. Oh yeah. Today, everyone knows what an IP phone is. Everyone knows what a virtual fax is. But back then, it was really cool. So I got myself all set up and I left for Asia. I went back to Vietnam. And I saw some incredible things. It's a shame because in my other presentation, I had put up photos of things I saw in Vietnam and I wanted to share them with you. Well, I really learned some different things over there. I also learned to speak Vietnamese. I speak Vietnamese really well. When I walk into a place with Vietnamese people, I can have a half-hour conversation in Vietnamese. People freak out around me when they see me speaking Vietnamese. And I really loved those people. I really loved the people over there. I met a Vietnamese woman. Then I got married. I had children. My kids were born over there. My daughter went to school in Vietnam, in a French-speaking school, and then a few others who were in Vietnam. And then 4 years ago, I came back, so I stayed about 8 years over there in Vietnam. I really had a great time. I truly discovered something different in life. And then, now my whole family's here. It's like you were. They all came here with me to Quebec. They're adapting, and it's really beautiful to see. The other day, it was the kickoff at Multi-Prêts. I've got my phone. It's ringing. The kickoff was at the casino. There were tons of people. It was noisy. The room was packed. My phone rings, and I look, I recognize it. It's a non-Vietnamese person. I said, darn. I said, I'll take it. I quickly step out of the room, answer the phone, and it's a Vietnamese lady. She explains her situation to me. She tells me she has a property in Montreal. That's worth 1.1 million. And this kickoff, it was last September, just 3 weeks ago. A property worth 1.1 million in Montreal? She has $500,000 in a private mortgage loan with a private lender. She needed that substantial amount of money because her mother was dying, and she was her mother's primary caregiver during that very difficult and emotional time, providing support and comfort as her mother's health declined. Now, her mother has passed away. It was the family property. The private lender set a 6-month term. He prepaid the interest for 6 months because $500,000 at 12% costs $5,000 a month. She didn't have the ability to pay. The private lender said, look, you'll figure this out. We're going to prepay the interest for you. That way, you don't have any payments to make. After 6 months, he sent a 60-day notice. She didn't have the money to make her monthly payments. So she sent a 60-day notice. Then, at the end of the 60-day notice, I don't know how she managed to convince her of this, but she went to sit down with her and said, look, I'll give you an extra 60 days if you sign a deed in lieu of payment. We're going to go sign this in front of the notary. And look, I'll give you an extra 60 days, but at the end of those 60 days, well, you have to find financing. Otherwise, it's my house. I'm talking to her on the phone. She has an accent. I can tell she's not from here, who really understands the system. So she said yes. You know, she thought that after 60 days, right? After 60 days, I'm out on the street. But hey, he gives me another 60 days. He's cool. He's fair. Except what you have to understand is that the moment those 60 days are up, there's usually another 5 to 6 months before she actually loses her house. So he said, we're going to give you an additional 60 days. And then when she called me, I was at the Multi-Prêts kickoff, and she explained all this to me. I told her, look, we're tight on time, but I'll do everything I can to help you. I started talking to her on the phone in Vietnamese, and the girl was freaking out. Because she had signed a deed in lieu of payment in front of a notary. We couldn't do anything. And today, October 7th, it's today that the bailiffs are coming to evict her from her property. There's still nothing we can do. So there are tons of private mortgage lenders on the market. There are a lot of them. If you go on Google and type private mortgage, you'll see I have 3 websites on the first page of Google. The reason I'm telling you this is that in Quebec, all the private mortgage lenders have called me. They all made me their service offer. Do you know how many names and phone numbers of private lenders I have? Well, I keep them all noted down. I have over 75 of them. It's not a regulated field. Out of the 75, there are 2 or 3 that I actually do business with. Because you can feel it when you talk to them that they have one thing in mind: to take people's property. And like I said, I've been in business for 15 years. I've been doing private mortgage lending for 15 years. I don't want to end up with complaints at the OSIC. I don't want to have any problems. Our team is doing well. We have a good volume. We're helping people. When we do a transaction, it's really with the goal of helping people. And I have no desire to lose everything just to make a deal. The private lenders I work with are people we've had accredited at Multi-Prêts, people we've checked out, more than just the source of their funds and the lender's background. No, what are your intentions? Me, I sit down with them and I talk with them. I don't want that after 6 months. There's a 60-day notice that goes out automatically without even talking to the client, just because after 6 months, he could have renewed the loan. He could have given her another loan. There was still plenty of room. She just lost $600,000 in equity. It's today that she's losing it. So what private lenders look at is how much the house is worth, how much they're lending. The way it should be done, in my opinion, okay, for a private loan transaction to happen, first, a client should always go through a mortgage broker, because the job of a private lender is to lend their money. My job is to make sure the client goes back to the banks at the end of the term. Looking at the situation, it was obvious she wouldn't qualify for the banks after 6 months. She only did a 6-month tram. You also have to be careful because in private mortgage lending, there are lenders, there are mortgage brokers, but there are also what we call consultants. These are unlicensed mortgage brokers who just put together transactions and send them to private lenders. They send their invoice to the notary. That's a little message to the OASIC. It's very hard to report these people. I had a whole complete file. I sent it to the OSIC. They tell me, oh no, you have to fill out this specific form. Your team leader has to sign this form. Okay, but in the end, it didn't lead to anything. So I know the AMF is in the room, and OASIC too. And if you're interested in setting up, establishing, or creating underwriting criteria, as well as rules and guidelines for private mortgage lending, well, I just want to let you know that I'm volunteering and would be more than happy to help out in any way I can. Thank you very much, everyone, for your time and attention. I really appreciate it. Subtitles by Société Radio.